Joining us now for Word Brief and a review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, Adefemi.
Good morning, Dr. Ruben. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning, Rufai. How's everybody doing this morning?
Good morning, Femi. Good.
Lovely, lovely, lovely. Okay, let's jump into it because last night I was up for quite a while, not only watching the Republican National Convention, but also listening to Joe Biden's speech at the NAACP National Convention in Las Vegas. I think he was speaking in Nevada. And if you listened to his speech, I do think that this was the strongest performance he has given, definitely since that debate. And I do think that in the aftermath of what we've seen over the weekend with the assassination attempt on Trump, questions about whether or not the Democrats would be able to come back and make this some type of a fair fight, this is the Joe Biden I can imagine many people had been waiting to listen to. He spoke coherently. He spoke very, very strongly. He talked about a lot of issues pertaining to the Black and African American community there in Nevada. And he was definitely welcomed with lots of cheers, applause. He took lots of jabs at Donald Trump. He talked about how comments that Trump had made previously about Mexicans and immigrants coming to steal quote unquote black jobs. And he said, well, what black jobs are you talking about? Because the black jobs that I'm talking about are the vice presidency of the United States, or the presidency of the United States. And that was really welcome. So I do think that this was a very, very strong performance for Joe Biden and for his detractors. Perhaps then they'll take a back seat and think, well, this man has been adamant that he's not going to step down. And he has finally, at long last, given a very strong vocal performance. Nobody's talking about any gaffes. Now everyone's talking about the content of his delivery and the quality of it too. So that is what we saw in Nevada with the NAACP, their 115th National Convention that took place last night. But then if we're looking at day 2 of the Republican National Convention taking place in Milwaukee, it's definitely quite an interesting to see the shift of the RNC from what we saw during the last election run to now. This has definitely become a Republican National Convention that is absolutely preparing itself for a Trump presidency. Rather than this being a battleground for all of these other Republican aspirants to battle to emerge as the candidate, you saw a lot of past rivals, recent rivals, kind of change their tune and speak with one voice in support of Donald Trump. So it was quite, to some extent, almost a little bit uncomfortable because you're not really supposed to expect a national convention to be everybody unifying against one candidate. But I do think that this is politics, one. And to some extent, I do think that perhaps somebody could interpret what they saw in terms of DeSantis' speech, Nikki Haley's speech, as almost a bit of a gaslight. Because this is somebody you are staunchly against. And we got criticism from Nikki Haley some just months ago, weeks ago. And reports suggested that just last night, and I'm talking about now almost 48 hours ago, that Nikki Haley was unaware, didn't know whether or not she was going to speak at the National Convention, said that she was expecting an invitation but wasn't going to ask for one. And so that just underscores the real subsurface angst between these political rivals, but it does sound as though they are uniting against Trump and definitely rallying behind, against Biden and rallying for Trump. So as I said, Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, both of their speeches fell a little flat. I don't think Ron DeSantis would be proud of his performance, but there we go. They had, of course, challenged Donald Trump for the Republican nomination, but that's not what went on. But talking about the issues that were discussed at the National Convention, they talked a lot about immigration, as they usually do, and about drug use, about crime, and the heavy implication was that this upturn that they allege happening in the United States as it pertains to crime is because of Biden's failure in leadership. But if you are fact-checking the data, it doesn't make sense because crime has fallen 30% under Trump. And while we can talk about drug use increasing, fentanyl, for example, that has increased under Trump, but under Biden. But it also beforehand increased between Obama and Trump too. So this is an issue that it's important to put these numbers into context and understand what is actually happening there. And then lastly, one of the women who had a lot to say in support of Trump was his daughter-in-law. I think it's Eric Trump's wife. She spoke.
Lara.
Thank you, Lara. She spoke at length last night into this morning about the person behind the politician that we see. She talks a lot about the warmth of Donald Trump, who he is as a grandparent, as a father-in-law, and I do think it went some way to build a warmer image with this person who seems to be very, very brash and quite aggressive and quite, in some instances, quite a nasty person when it comes to mudslinging between his different political rivals. So to hear not only his daughter-in-law, but also the governor of Arkansas, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, also talk about how he would have a personal relationship in terms of like building her confidence and being a real supporter of them. They've gone a long way to showing Trump. We can call him President Trump, but former President Trump in this context. They've gone a long way to make sure that he is perceived to the public as somebody who is relatable, someone who does care about families, someone who does care about women, not only in the family, but also in the workplace.
I mean, truly, you can call him President Trump. I mean, it's former President Trump.
Former President Trump, but
yeah, I mean, you can call him that. But you see, what do you expect? You didn't expect Lara to come and say how a bully and a monster Trump is. I mean, they would edit things about him. Right. It's his time in the sun. It's his convention.
Yes. And she's also the co-chair, is she not?
And you didn't expect people like Nikki Haley to come and say otherwise. She would say she endorses him, but Nikki Haley also threw a jab by saying we had strong differences, which you cannot pull out. And you would not expect people like Marco Rubio to say otherwise, because definitely they too, they see their future in the Republican Party and they want to be seen as party men.
Sure.
But there were a lot of lies at the convention yesterday. I'm sure you've pointed out some of them. There were a lot of empirical fallacies, things that were not true, that were just pure lies, that were at the convention yesterday. But it doesn't stop the fact that here his train is moving on. He'll probably speak tomorrow.
Yes, Thursday.
Yeah, he's speaking Thursday. And we'll start to wind this all out. But most importantly is when they go back to the campaign. And some other stories that are emanating. In fact, there are many computer calculation modeling, and there's also a tip-off as regards people trying to assassinate Trump.
Right.
So you should be careful about that. Another big story was the leak between this conversation and the Kennedy conversation, the leak that happened that showing that he was trying to solicit that one to probably be able to step down for him and all of that. But as regards Biden, let me call you Femi and you're Biden,
Am I?
Truth is,
Am I?
Yes, he hit the right notes. I'm not see. If you ask Ayo, the first day here after the debates, in terms of practicality and knowing the issues and all of that, Biden won. But the problem is cognitive acuity to be able to bring all of these ideas together.
Cognitive issues wasn't an issue yesterday. What do you think?
Okay, right.
That's just it.
So showing for Biden at the NAACP convention, especially with regards to consolidating his base with the black and minor ethnic groups in America. Yes. And this is a place, this is a group of people where he's seeming to lose popularity, compared to his 2000 showing. And a number of people are saying that in terms of winning that strong base, the Hispanics, the Black Americans, African Americans, they're just being able, and he had a fantastic outing, like you mentioned. He was able to speak to the good points, even though he said that they would, temper down on the political, violence and all that in terms of the words. He was still able to pick out, I only use the word, slag of, or pick out some of the things that Trump had done in the past with the black community, especially now that he's putting forward a woman like Amber Rose saying that, Trump loves black people, but trying to remember, because history doesn't forget. There are a number of things, and the black job one was just a classical example with regards to that. So bringing that up, and now I see him focusing more on, against his cognitive abilities or questioning around that. The fact that Trump has lied, Trump has has backed policies that were anti-black in some instances, the things that he has spoken about. So he was able to build strong on that. In terms of to what extent that would affect, they seem to love him, in between. They're saying 4 more years, they seem to like that. Hopefully that would get that base stronger again. On the other hand, Trump is also trying to capitalize on Biden's popularity or the grounds that he's lost amongst the minority ethnic groups in America, and looking to gain that support. To what extent, I'm not sure that would go really far, especially with his choice of Vance as a vice. I'm not sure that would do any favors for him with the black community in America.
Okay, day 2 of the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee was a day of ring kissers. They came to kiss the ring of Donald Trump. They came to ask more or less for forgiveness. And it's surrounded now by persons who were once staunch rivals or opponents or critics, all of them now praising him to high heavens. Nikki Haley, South Florida former governor, made it very clear that you don't have to agree with Donald Trump to vote for him. He has my support, 100%, she said. And she was not alone. Rasmaravani, who also ran before now for the Republican ticket, endorsed him. So did Marco Rubio. So did Senator Ted Cruz. So did Ben Carson. All of them praising him to high heavens. The first day we had Amber Rose, the reality TV superstar.
Is Amber Rose even black? I'm not sure what was going on
well,
there.
It's celebrity endorsement.
She
falls.
If that was the point, it's a celebrity.
She falls into the category of celebrity endorsement.
Right.
And she addressed the theme about racism.
Right.
About people criticizing Trump and the Republicans, saying that they are anti-black, they are anti-gay, they are anti-this and that. But as she joined them and discovered that, these are my people, they are like me.
A woman who's neither black nor gay, but okay.
Yeah, in other words, that it's an open family.
Yes, I'm with you, I'm with you.
Okay, so you had all that endorsement yesterday, but the big issue with the Republicans now, particularly in Europe, is J.D. Vance. The fear in Europe is that, Trump is an isolationist, an American exceptionalism prophet. And now to have a guy like J.D. Vance, who is against abortion completely, who is a Ukraine skeptic, who has called Britain an emerging Islamic state. That is even giving them a concern in Britain. That why will he call Britain, an emerging Islamic state? That. And then it is a generational, best generation, theorist. So all of that has created fears about, the worst form of isolationism that you can expect that will have implications for trade and relations with Europe. Yeah. So in a global context, the concern is about J.D. Vance.
Got you.
Beyond all the ring kissing that we saw yesterday.
Oh, there we go. Well, let's take a move on now to newspaper headlines across the world. We'll begin, of course, in Nigeria with This Day newspaper. And the front page story, one of the front page story looks at the armed forces and all these other organizations, their alleged new war against oil theft. And they say that on this new war, they're going to be focusing on targeting oil theft with things like harsher punishments for vandals and for oil thieves. They want harsher and stringent laws against price gouging and also the sale of adulterated fuel in areas like Akwa Ibom. But as you were all mentioning, again, absolutely, in theory, these adaptations are welcomed, but on the ground, does this mean that there are no... What have you been doing in the meantime, essentially, to tackle this issue? It will continue to be one unless there are literal and immediately tangible solutions being offered. Essentially, what the armed forces, the NNPCL have said is that in the next 3 months, there should be some form of respite. There should be a result in this war. But again, it's very difficult to understand or identify what metrics by which they will be able to identify what an improvement in this situation is. So that's the front page of This Day. If we move on to the Daily Trust, the Daily Trust is looking at airfare and how domestic airlines, the fares for domestic airlines are now more expensive than it is to fly internationally. So essentially, they're using a Lagos-Abuja route in this example, and about how it costs 250,000 naira for people to fly from Lagos to Abuja. But if you were flying to Accra, for example, on different carriers, they mentioned Air Peace. It's around, I think Air Peace had the cheapest alternative, so 229,000 naira to fly to Accra via Air Peace from Lagos. But that can be as high as 266,000 naira on Ibom Air. The point is, it shouldn't be more expensive to fly an hour within one country than it is to fly outside of the country. But then again, if we're looking at this from an international context, in the United Kingdom, for example, there are constantly protests and people are lamenting about the fact that sometimes it's cheaper to fly from London to Barcelona than it is to take a train from London to Leeds. Because in that context, domestic travel, looking at train fares, they're far more expensive than airfares. So this does seem to be an international issue. But looking at Nigeria and the front page of Daily Trust, it is quite a feat that it is now so much more expensive to fly to Abuja. I put my hands up. I think the last time I paid for a flight to Abuja was probably around like 55,000 to 60,000 naira. So, yeah, it's been quite a jump in these 2 years. Staying with aviation now, if we look at Business Day, they are also talking about aviation, and they are talking about how different airlines have been blacklisted by international lessors for using their planes, not returning them. Some airlines have actually said that they're not going to return these airplanes because they haven't received monies for them, and they're threatening to go to court. Among the airlines that have been blacklisted or mentioned in this report on Business Day are Arik, for example, Axman Air Peace, Ibom Air, United Nigeria Airlines. Some of them have discussed the difficulties that they've been facing. We're still looking at the Daily Trust. The Daily Trust, as I already mentioned, looked at aviation and the reasons for this hike. When you read the article, the reasons identified by certain speakers, they talk about, oh, this is just simple economics. It's forex, but also they talk about dwindling supply, about how 50% of domestic carriers, their fleets have been grounded. And so there's less airplanes as very, very high demand, and that's why airlines are able to charge as much as they do. They're saying it's simple economics, but I mean, at some extent, there has to be some respite. So lots of discussion about the aviation industry there. I'll move on to The Guardian. The Guardian is looking at 11 universities and how they've been struggling with electricity costs. They mention, for example, Unilag, the maximum bills according to Discos is 300 million naira per month, which is just staggering. And they talk about UI and how their maximum monthly bill is around 280 million naira, and then Uni Ilorin around 230 million naira. These are staggering amounts. Yes, of course, these are not individual homes, these are whole academic institutions, but this is huge. And so as a result, clearly there's going to be a difficulty to pay that every month. And that's why, as the headline puts it, blackouts are looming. If we now move on to The Punch are looking again at local government autonomy, about how 13 states are rushing to hold their council polls. I believe Kaduna has now set a date for the 19th of October to hold its own. And it'll be interesting to see what other states and areas are going to use for that situation there. But yes, of course, going back to aviation before we move on to other African papers, it seems as though the lion's share of the issue when it comes to shortages and not having an effect on these prices is because many airlines are having their craft stranded abroad as a result of difficulties in procuring foreign exchange, for example, as you mentioned, Rufai. So it does seem as though at every end, whether you're the consumer, whether you're the plane operator, or inside or outside the country, there's definitely a lot of issues there.
Maintenance space for MROs
Indeed.
That,
I'll come to you all for your comments on these Nigerian papers, but I'll just run through all of them. If we look at the Daily Nation, they are looking at now, the Daily Nation of Kenya, they've talked about how the death toll relating to their protest has now reached 50, which is a huge landmark for them, a devastating number. And they talk about how it is that this has happened. This, of course, has been the situation since the middle of June, and of course here in July as well, looking at firstly the anti-finance bill and lots of other societal issues that have happened since then. So that's the front page of the Daily Nation. And then also the Daily Graphic of Ghana takes a look at developmental issues such as autism and how inadequate hands, as the headline reads, has been hampering autism care. So it's been quite interesting to see how different banks GTB of Ghana, they have voted for funds to change this health and social care issue in the country. And then lastly, if we look at our international papers, the Daily Express are looking now with quite intent on how Keir Starmer is going to challenge this immigration problem or illegal immigration, because since the election yesterday into today, there have been a record number of migrants illegally crossing the English Channel trying to reach the United Kingdom. So now the question is, what is Keir Starmer going to do? If you're going to scrap this Rwanda plan, say it's not what you want, it's not how you want to handle this problem, how then are you going to do it? And then lastly, the Daily Mail looks at the King's speech. The King will be speaking today, later on this morning, and they could be a mention about planning, curbing residents, and a blocking of controversial developments. It does look as though we've run out of time, but I would love to hear your thoughts, Ayo, very, very quickly on what we're seeing in aviation, for example, or any of our Nigerian papers.
Fine, the first thing that comes to mind is that we're paying for not very great service. Even though, it's economics in some instances, it is the cost of doing business in others, but the truth is that the NAACP is trying to sanitize that industry, but oftentimes what we're paying is mediocre service at the best, in the best way possible. Flew recently, the cancelled flights at will. It is badly run. I must admit that the response was very good, especially from Michael Achimogo, in terms of saying that it would refund. I haven't got my refund yet, by the way. But very bad service, very poor service in that space.
Right.
So if they're going to charge that amount of money, then let it be bearable for Nigerians to pay. But even more importantly, we need to fix that, because we cannot be paying more within, within interstate, and regionally we are paying less. I think I mean, for whatever reason it is, not
doesn't make sense, does it?
And then improve the services as well. If we are paying, let it be good.
Exactly.
So thank you very much, Adefe.
Well, it's called the King's Speech,
Yes.
and it will be delivered at 11:57 a.m. British Standard Time to coincide with the opening of the parliamentary year of the British Parliament. They've been on recess. They're coming back. Now, the King is going to talk about 35 bills, and these bills are being proposed by the Labour government. Chief among them will be the planning bill, which is Starmer saying, look, we're going to develop more projects, 1.5 million additional houses within the next 5 years at the rate of, how many thousands per month. And even greenbelts will be affected. Then there will be issues about nationalization, renationalization of the railways. There will be issues also, about taxes, 35 bills in total. That remains to be seen. Now, you talked about electricity not being in Nigerian universities. About 11 universities are affected. Uniben students went onto the streets to protest. The University of Abuja is affected. Ahmadu Bello University is affected. University of Ibadan Teaching Hospital, which is supposed to be one of the best in the world at a time, is affected. Well, universities without electricity, Owe Lakemfa, one of our colleagues, has written, it should be seen from the angle of the fact that this is Nigeria's special contribution to university 21st century knowledge economy, because we look like the only country where we have universities, we are producing graduates, but they are studying in darkness. I think it looks like a very important contribution, very unique to 21st century knowledge economy.
Only in Nigeria that is happening. But to a large extent, I think it also opened up opportunities for investors to have power plants in those universities. Right. If my memory is right, I think only about one have. They should be able to also produce their independent power independently. That's where the electrical engineering departments should also come in at a time like this, using many sources of energy and all of that. But we also need to fix the forex problem. It's killing the airlines.
We do.
That's right. Well, thank you so much, Adefe.
Always a pleasure.
Great to have you with us on the show.